Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker of Elkins Consulting. Many of my clients reach out to me because they're in transition. Their children are hitting milestone ages. They want more from their work. They're hitting a big number birthday. And they want to develop clarity about their natural strengths, what their next adventure might look like. In this series, you'll hear me ask my guests questions to dig deeply into the stories that shaped their lives, stories that uncover patterns and may unveil insights into dissatisfaction, and also where their strengths lie and where they found and continue to find joy. This podcast's intention is to have listeners think of their own related stories and how they tell them, discovering the internal messages that are limiting their success, and discovering how to shift their stories so they become positive life lessons to move them forward. If you're curious about what it would be like to work with me, visit elkinsconsulting.com and schedule a one-time 90-minute StrengthsFinder session. Listeners, you are in for a treat for this podcast. I am re-interviewing one of my very first guests and also a dear, dear friend, Kimberly Davis, author of Brave Leadership. And again, dear, dear friend. So Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Oh, this is so much fun. I am so excited to talk with you.
Well, it's been almost 3 years.
I can't believe that. Because I think you had just started. I was like one of your first, second, third. I was like really early on.
I think you were my third guest. I'll have to look back at that and put a link to it.
That's amazing. I mean, when I think about everything that's happened in the world since then and in our lives since then, it's hard to believe.
Well, we've just continued to contribute to our stories and the messages that we share with audiences, right? I mean,
absolutely.
In that time, we have both grown into our work even more.
Yeah.
And that was,
and I don't think we had even met in person at that time yet. I think we'd had a couple of calls, but I think that was before I actually got to hug you in person.
That's right. And the first time we hugged in person was that at the conference here in Helena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So
awesome.
Just for our listeners, a little history here. Kimberly and I met on LinkedIn through a mutual connection, I think. And I ended up being one of your beta readers for the book Brave Leadership.
Yeah.
And then once it was published, I shared it around and I shared it with our Women's Leadership Network board here in Helena. And everyone agreed immediately that you needed to come and speak at the next conference. And that's how we ended up getting you here to my house and to our little town and to meet our tribe of women here.
That is such a special group of people you have there, Sarah. You have created something very, very special. I have traveled all over, and I don't know that I've ever met a group of women that take care of each other in the way that your group in Helena does.
Well, I would love to say I created it, but the organization's been around for 35 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just shows how amazing the women in Montana are, right?
We can be. Absolutely.
Yeah, because your listeners may not realize that we have that in common. I grew up in Montana, so I am a Montanan at heart.
I remember finding that out and just being thrilled, and then being able to share that with the WLN board, which made it even more exciting to have you come and speak at our event that year.
Yeah, it was funny because when I was a child, we used to travel to Helena and stay in that exact same hotel. And I've got so many memories of that hotel. And it was just bizarre to go back as an adult. And a lot of it hasn't really changed that much. So it was a really neat kind of full circle moment for me.
I love that. Well, speaking of full circles, part of why I wanted to have you back on the show is because I know a lot has changed. For one thing, you moved all the way to Costa Rica was that December 2020? Is that right?
We moved January 8th of 2020. January 8th, 2021.
So it's
It's
been
kind
just
of,
over a year.
COVID's just kind of a blur, right? So
Yes.
like, what year was that?
I know everything is starting to blend. And a lot has changed, but your work has just grown in terms of your dedication to the meaning behind brave leadership and how people, particularly women, but all people, can step into that. And I'm just so curious when it comes to teaching and coaching. I feel like as teachers and coaches, if we aren't continually practicing and experiencing things ourselves, then we can't continue to do the work we're doing in authentic leadership.
Right. And I think that's one of the joys in what we do and one of the biggest challenges in what we do, right? Because we're asking people to bring mindfulness to their work, to bring self-awareness and to their lives and their work, and to step outside of their comfort zone. So that requires us to be constantly putting ourselves under the microscope and examining, are we walking our talk? Where can we grow? Where are we stagnating? Where are we not being honest with ourselves? Right. And where are we playing it safe? And as much as I would love to say, yeah, that's really fun, that can be, that's not so always fun. It's not. And the truth is I don't always like what I see, but I'm grateful to be surrounded by people who are on the same journey, right? So when I'm up against it, I have people in my life like you that I can call and say, hey, I'm bumping up against my own stuff. And then I've got good tools, I've got the tools that I work with. And luckily I surround myself with other people with phenomenal tools. So it helps me get back to myself. And not just myself, to my better self, right? I would love to say my best self. My best self is somewhat aspirational, I think. But it helps me get back to my better self when I lose track of her. And I think that's just being human, right? We can't help but take a few steps forward and a few steps back, right? I kind of think of it doing the cha-cha in life, right?
Yes. So I remember a vivid moment early in my coaching when I was listening to what this coaching client was saying, and I realized what he needed was some creativity in his life. So I gave him a tool. I said, I actually shipped off one of those really cool coloring books and some colored pencils for him.
Oh, that's great.
And he and his wife actually went out that day to Michael's, where they live up in, I think they're in the Bay Area in San Francisco, Santa Barbara. That's where this was years ago, right? So,
yeah.
But we talked through how it felt to do these creative activities after work. 15 minutes turned into 2 hours. And I said, well, how did that feel? Tell me. And the next day, did you feel like you were more refreshed at work? Did you feel like you could better problem solve? Because you and I both know with Melissa Hughes, one of our dear friends, mutual dear friends, that kind of creativity helps our brain become better at problem solving.
Right.
And, so we talked about it. It was wonderful, but I'll never forget that I said, so what are you going to do with this beautiful thing that you just colored? And it was a quote from a John Lennon song. He said, what do you mean do with it? And I said, well, are you going to tear it out of the book? You're going to frame it. You're going to put it on your fridge. Like, what are you going to do with it? And he said, oh, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. Well, maybe I'll give it to my mom. No, this is a 50-year-old man.
That's awesome.
I'll give it to my mom. She loves this kind of thing and she'll laugh and it'll be fun, but she'll also keep it. And I laughed. I said, oh, that sounds wonderful. But I remember getting off the phone and thinking, why was I so insistent that he do something with it? He didn't care.
Yeah. Right.
And I realized it was my own stuff, that external validation that I need when I do things like that. Like when I bake something and I want somebody to say, wow, that's beautiful and so delicious. Or when I would do my ceramic work, as I was building something, I would be thinking about the function and who I was going to gift it to.
Right.
It was this external. And here I was kind of pushing that mean, he didn't feel pressure about it or anything, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to really look in the mirror and think, why am I being so insistent? And it changed the way I coach forever.
That's interesting. Well, I think I mean, you know this better than anyone, that our strengths are Achilles heel, right? Mm-hmm. And you were doing what you do so well. And that also can be the things that become our blind spots too.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear one of those like moments where something changed, something shifted for you when you realized you were coming up against that mirror, that you weren't so super excited to see that reflection. Yeah. And you made that adjustment.
Well, so for me, I think I tend to work through most of my stuff through writing. So that's that. And I write almost every day. So I end up having several iterations of a piece that I will work on, and then I'll set it aside and I'll come back the next day and go, and that's where I have the realization that I'm working through something. Usually in the first pass, I don't even notice that that's what I'm doing. And then I usually look at it and say, okay, well, how does this apply to everyone? So it's not just, Kimberly working her stuff out, in public, right?
Even though most people would resonate.
What lesson is there? Yeah.
Right.
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 Yeah, what lesson is there that this is a universal thing that we bump into, if there is one, and almost always there is, because I'm not that special. My problems are, like other people's problems. They happen to be unique to my situation, but not unique in the way we tend to process them necessarily. So I always kind of find my way back to myself through that process. And then if I don't, I always have to pick up the phone, because I don't, sometimes, it's that old saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. You can't see what's getting in your way. And that was something that was going on with me and my son, actually, because my son is 17, and he is, he's coming into his own. He has got his own set of values that aren't necessarily aligned with mine. And so we were bumping into having some value conflicts, and it would cause me incredible anxiety. And I was tense, and I felt this such a heavy sense of responsibility to make sure that I'm parenting him, so when he goes out into the world, he will carry, my good values out into the world. But he's his own person now, right? He's his own person, and it was causing tremendous stress between the two of us. And finally, my husband, and I was too close to it. I mean, I knew it felt icky. I knew that I didn't like the way I was showing up in it, but I didn't know how else to be in it. And my husband pulled me aside one night and he said, look, if you want to have a relationship with your son, you're going to have to allow him to find his own values. And it's not always going to be in alignment with yours. And, some of that's going to be maturity, that he's going to have some trial and error and realize that, maybe mom was right, but he's not there yet. And if you push it, it's going to cost you both dearly. And I think it's costing, how you feel around him. And it definitely was. And the interesting thing was, Sarah, is I think it took me a few days to process that conversation too, because I'm like,
of course, yeah, because you're angry, a little defensive. Right? There's some defensiveness and shame involved in that. Right. Your kid.
But after I stepped away from it, I realized, and this is between you and me and the listeners, because we're not going to let Tim listen to this, that he was right. He was right. But I was my own biggest roadblock to the relationship I wanted to have with my son. And since then, it's gotten so much better. And ironically, when I stopped pushing and imposing my own values on him, he stopped trying to push my buttons, and automatically the values kind of fell back in line, right? But I could not push my agenda on him. And I think that's really hard. And I feel in many ways in my work, it's easier for me to give feedback and coach. But with my son, it's not as easy. It's not as easy. And I have to remind myself that I am not the expert on this. In fact, I feel like I don't know what the heck I'm doing most of the time. so
I think most parents feel that way.
Yeah. And thank goodness we only have one. Maybe that's the problem too, is that we only have one. So he gets all of our attention. But he's going to grow into a great human being. He's had a great foundation, but he's also trying to figure out who he is. And I need to give him the freedom to do that. And that's hard. that's hard to do.
It is. But I think that having these challenges and this level of vulnerability allows you to be a better coach externally. And if we didn't have those struggles, we couldn't relate to the people that we are supposed to be guiding.
Right. Well, and it's another example too of our strengths are our Achilles heel, right? So I think my number 2 or 3 strength, it's in my top 5. I don't remember where it falls in the top 5, is belief. And so, I feel really strongly about the things I believe in. And that's also what makes me so passionate, right? About one makes me so driven to make a difference and so committed to what I'm committed to. But, it can cause problems with judgment and my beliefs are not his beliefs. Right. So that's, I was bumping into my strength. I was overusing that strength with him.
Yes. I love that you just said that. And for our listeners, in Gallup's Strengths Finder, I guess it's called Clifton Strengths now. They switched that a couple of years ago. There's a talent called belief. And as Kimberly so beautifully defined or described it, it is a core value that can't be shaken. It is a strong understanding of the world and your role in it that is just, it's rigid. It is a rigid talent, kind of like responsibility that can be seen as a very rigid talent. And the way that I describe it to people who aren't as familiar with how they show up, both for better and for worse, is that belief and responsibility, both of those talents, can come across as very judgmental. And even if there's no intention and you don't think you're being judgmental, it can come across, it can be perceived that way. Right. And the key is looking into your other talents, like your empathy or your relator, to remember what the relationship is about and the meaning behind it. But also, I love that you just described this so well, understanding that you can't project that onto somebody else and think it's not going to damage your relationship. Right.
Yeah. I'm grateful he stuck it out with me.
Well, he's only 17. So
yeah. But,
better to happen now. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than at 30.
Absolutely. But I think also, Sarah, I'm fortunate that I do the work that I do, that I am so committed to self-examination that because of that, I was able to recognize what was happening. But most people, don't spend their life under a microscope. And I think it shows the importance of, continuing to do the self-work. There is no end point. That it is, even when you think you're pretty self-aware and you're pretty mindful and you're working on that, it is a daily commitment to ourselves.
It's a journey. Because
the stakes are always higher than we realize. Your relationships with the people in your family, the people you love, those are really high stakes. And so what I have to, now when I hear the voice in my head going, oh, did that just come out of your mouth? Right.
Oh,
I
yes.
remind myself to go back to my intention with him. And that is, I want him to experience being loved and accepted. And if what's about to come out of my mouth is not going to ensure that he experiences himself being loved and accepted, then I need to reframe it. I need to find another way to say it. And sometimes I'm more successful at that than others. But
like, we're human, right? I mean, we have to.
Yeah.
Again,
definitely.
It's the times that we're not successful that I think make us so relatable to the people we're trying to serve.
Absolutely. I mean, because quite honestly, and I think you and I are on the same page with this, anyone who says they're an expert and they've got it all going on and, they know all the answers, I would be really, really cautious about trusting that person, because nobody has it all going on. Nobody is a, true expert. Everyone's got their humanity that they're dealing with. And so I would much rather work with and trust someone who says, okay, here's what's real. I'm human. I've done a lot of work and I want to share what I know and support you how I can, but I'm not going to claim to be perfect, because there is no perfect.
Right. And so let's come back to this whole idea of self-reflection that I think I'm pretty self-reflective, and yet I still have those moments where I'm like, wow, I'm a communication coach and I totally fucked up that conversation. Excuse my language, but and it's almost always with family, right? Either my husband or one of my kids or my mom or my sister.
Right. Yes.
So when I know that you have a course that you published that you are promoting. Can you tell me a little bit about that in the context of that self-growth?
So my book, Brave Leadership, came out in 2018. And following the book's release, I was on an airplane all the time, busy, which was awesome. But I also never saw my family. So that part wasn't as awesome. And then COVID hit. So what happened is my dad got ill. And my dad passed away actually 2 years ago. It was leap year, February 29th. So
we're coming up
tomorrow. Yeah. So that was a big wake up call for me, because 2 weeks later, COVID hit. And I was really struck by this notion of, wow, you know what? You're not promised anything in this life. And if there's something you really want to do, you need to make it happen. And that's what preceded our plans to move to Costa Rica. But while we were also planning to move to Costa Rica, I realized that, okay, and I don't know if this was true for you, Sarah, but for me, when COVID hit, all this work that I had on the calendar fell off completely. So I went from traveling almost every week to nothing on the calendar. And there was some great family connecting time. That was good. But I realized professionally, I needed to pivot, because if all of my work is in-person workshops and all of my work is keynotes, we don't know what's going to happen with this. So I started getting really busy building out the online courses for Brave Leadership. And I spent all of 2020 and in 2021 really building out those online courses. And we launched in early 2021. And it's been awesome, because it allows me to be wherever I want to be in the world. So Costa Rica, I'm talking to you from Costa Rica, which is awesome. But the other thing is I was really worried that it would degrade the in-person experience, because, connectedness is another one of my strengths. So, being in person with people and watching people step into their power and be excited about who they are and what they have to offer the world, to me, that was amazing. And I didn't want to lose that. So what I did with the Brave Leadership Masterclass is I built it to unfold over 8 weeks, but people have a lifetime to use it. But it's not just video content. So there's 36 videos, I think, in the course. But we also meet at different milestones in the course and do these 2-hour Zoom workshops, which have been amazing. They've been amazing because in one workshop, I can have someone from South Africa, someone from New Zealand, someone from LA, someone from Dallas, all in the same place together. And we're getting to dive deep into the content and apply it to their personal lives. And what started happening was the relationships that were being built, because there are 5 live workshops. So, and they're each 2 hours. So that's more than you can do in a full day course anyway, right? So they spent quite a bit of time and they were really invested in one another, so much so that even though, the workshops, they could have taken it, they didn't have to take it the same with the same group of people. They could take it's virtual, so they could have taken it anytime I offered it. But they wanted to be with each other because they were committed to each other, and I found that to be such a beautiful way. And since I built it to unfold over 8 weeks, but because that initial launch group, we had the flexibility to work around everybody's schedules a little bit better. So they actually stretched this 8-week program out into 8 months. And but what that's done for them is it allows them to stay in the process longer. So that's where the mindfulness comes in. So one guy would watch a video every morning, and it was kind of how he grounded himself in the day. And then then he would take the conversation of that morning and apply it to everything he did during that day. And then he'd build on it the next day. And he said, you would have to make more videos because my whole focus for the day is now off now that I've gone through all the videos. But it's been amazing. So we've also then, we've got the Facebook group and we do Facebook Live so they can stay mindful and engaged in the process. And I think the thing that's about the Brave leadership journey is so much like we've been talking about already. There is no all or nothing. It's not like you arrive at Brave and you're done, right? And so every situation you face, you're going to bump into obstacles, whether that's yourself, whether that's other people, whether it's the environment you're in, whatever that happens to be, right? And so it's how do you keep these tools front of mind so eventually it becomes muscle memory. So you don't have to go, okay, I need to remember how to do this tool, right? No, eventually it just becomes part of how you think through things. Like, for example, when I talk about authenticity, I talk about, are people genuine, worthy of trust, reliance, and belief? So being able to bring that mindfulness into every situation you face. Who are you going to be with? Well, today I get to be with Sarah and all of her listeners, right? Well, what does Sarah and all of the people that, to the best of my understanding, tend to listen to this wonderful podcast? What do they need from me to experience me as genuine, as someone who's worthy of their trust, someone who's they can rely on and believe in, right? And it allows you to bring a mindfulness to that situation that otherwise you just go on autopilot. Well, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So it forces you to put empathy into action in every situation you face. Now, we're humans, right? So we're not always going to remember to do it, but being able to have a process that grounds you and a community that you can come back to and say, I'm bumping into this and I don't know how to deal with it, is a huge win. And, I think it's just like everything else. I think you probably experience this too, that as I have the privilege to work with other people, it just forces me to be better. It forces me to be more mindful. It forces, like, we talked about early on, you have to, teach thyself. And so the masterclass for me has been phenomenal experience because I get to stay in the process too,
Right. Well, there are a couple of things that have kind of crossed my mind as you were speaking about the course Masterclass. And one of them is this relates to, am I bringing myself to this situation?
Yeah.
Was early on when I read the book and then we spoke, and I mentioned being nervous about a keynote that I was about to do. And this was, when I was first really starting out 2018 as doing this as my full-time job.
Yeah.
And you said, well, that's because you're focused on you.
Yeah.
Of course you're nervous because you're thinking about you. How are you going to be perceived?
Right.
And then you said, focus on what you want to bring. Focus on what they can get as a result of hearing what you have to say. How is this going to change them for the better? Or what opportunities does this open up for them when you give your full self? Or something like that. Of course, I'm paraphrasing.
What's the impact you want to have on the people in front of you? Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember that so vividly. So that was the first thing that popped into my head.
So how did it change it for you, Sarah?
Well, for one thing, I have shared that with so many people. And I've given the book Brave Leadership as gifts to some of the people that I've worked with as a coach.
I'm so grateful. Yeah, thank you.
That part alone helps people take the pressure off. I wasn't nearly as nervous the next time I spoke. That was the impact on me. Thinking about realizing that I didn't need to be nervous because
in having that impact on you, right, you were able to better deliver your gift to the people in front of you, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things, a lot of people are talking about courage right now and bravery. But they kind of say, you just got to get in the arena. You just got to do it. It's going to be hard, but you just got to do it. But they don't really tell you how. Okay.
Exactly.
How do I do that without feeling like I'm going to throw up and all those physical sensations that come with being human when you're nervous and anxious and overwhelmed and afraid and all of those things. Nobody tells you how. And I think what I've been grateful to be able to tap into is giving people tools to do the things that they want to do that feel scary and hard and make their heart, pound a little bit and experience themselves, doing those things. And because I believe that confidence comes from knowing that you can count on yourself. And so when you have a situation like you did, where you went into that keynote and you got to experience yourself having an impact on the people in front of you, then the next time you're in that situation, and luckily you found yourself in that situation over and over and over again since that time, it becomes easier and easier and easier because you can count on yourself to deliver.
I have evidence. Yeah. I can look back at the times that it worked. I may see a time when it didn't work and I'll self-reflect. How could I have done that better? Yeah. And try not to beat myself up too much.
Right. And that part's hard. I think that's a really good point because for those of us who tend to put ourselves under the microscope all the time, it's a fine line, right? How are you able to be really honest with yourself without beating yourself up afterwards for being human, and just take the learning and move forward? I think it's a hard thing to do.
It is. I think it's hard for everybody. So but I just really love the idea of once you've done this and you can count on yourself and you've done it well and you have this evidence starting to pile up behind you, it does make it easier to step in. The other thing that I think happens when people say, just go and do it, put yourself out there, do it, but they don't give you the tools to do it well, is that not only do you end up going in and flubbing it and not building that evidence that you can, but you're actually doing a disservice also to your audience. What are they going to get out of it if you're not confidently presenting it?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing is you don't know what went wrong, right? Because you just kind of did it. So you didn't go in with a mindful intention of this is what I'm trying to do here. And that lack of focus leaves you not knowing, well, I didn't have a target, so how could I hit it? Right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that was what your book, and I'm sure your masterclass will does this for others. But for me, that's what the book gave me, was this idea of thinking, every time I've done any kind of presentation in my life, which has been decades of that, I would always think, what do I want them to leave with? What are the 3 top points that I want them to remember that I think will be most valuable to them? Yeah. Now, when I think about it, I also think, how do I want them to feel when they leave? Yeah. I want them to feel good about themselves.
Exactly.
Right?
And if you add one thing to that, Sarah, it will even ramp it up even more. So I encourage people to think about, how do I want them to feel and what do I want them to do following this conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we think about, what do I want them to do, we make that self-serving. So like if I were, right. I want them to hire me again. Right. Exactly. But that's not really about them. That's about you, right? That's putting yourself back on the hot seat. So if you think about, how I want them to feel, I want them to feel uplifted. I want them to feel good about themselves. I want them to feel inspired, whatever that is, whatever is true for your audience. And then what do I want them to do? I want them to change the way they talk to their child the next time they have a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that has nothing to do with you, Sarah, right? Like, you're like, whether they do that or not, you're not going to know the difference, but that could change their life. Right. Mm. And you're focused on, and if you're that clear that that's what I want them to do, is to have a different kind of conversation with the people they love, then you're going to show with such intentionality. And those points that you want them to hear, you will hit them in a way that they will hear them in a way that they can't forget it, because there's so much intention behind it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 I'm just remembering certain events where I spoke and when it worked. I'm trying to pile up the evidence right now. Right.
Yeah. But it's a constant. I mean, I would love to say I never get nervous when I speak. That's not true. But I will say that now, if I'm on stage and that I've got all these red flags in my head that kind of go, oh, you're focused on yourself. So it's that, I wonder what they think. Are they enjoying this? I don't see any expression on their face. What's wrong? Right. Like all these red flags, which means I'm putting myself in the spotlight and I'm thinking about me. Am I okay? Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to make a mistake? What do they think? All that stuff. But now when I hear that little voice in my head, now I can go, okay, Kimberly, get yourself off that hot seat and focus on that person in the third row who needs to hear from you. What's the impact you want to have on, and get real specific, that person. And then I take it to another person, and what's the impact I want to have on that person. And that will almost always get me out of my own way.
I love that. And partly because I just put something like this into a post about singing performance, and how I was on stage and I'm singing and I'm having so much fun. And I see like these 3 people in the back just hanging out. They appear bored. They're not smiling. They're not dancing. And I'm focused so hard on those 3 people to try to change them. Yes. And I have 100 and something other people that are willing participants that I'm ignoring. Right. And that's, for me, that's how I apply what you just said. The red flags, I need to remember it's red flag. If I'm looking at somebody who's not engaged and trying to make them engaged, that's my flag, to turn around and look at somebody who's smiling and dancing and make sure they are having the damn best time of their lives.
The best time they can possibly have. Right. Well, and the other thing is, we of course, as human beings, it's natural that it's all about us, right? It's all about us. That face that they're making that makes them look bored and uninterested, that means they don't like me. They don't like the music. They're not, but the truth is, maybe maybe they stayed up too late the night before. Maybe they had a bad conversation with their boss. Maybe, they've got indigestion. Who knows what it is,
probably
right?
has
But we
nothing
can't
to do
help
with
but
me.
make meaning.
Right.
Oh, it's about me. They don't like me, right?
I know, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's human. So we have to have ways to go, okay, how do I disengage myself from this self-defeating focus of attention? Because I can't deliver my best when I'm thinking about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's the best part of this whole conversation. This is the part that's going to stick with me for the next 6 months as I work through all of the presentations and workshops I'm doing.
It's going to be awesome. You're going to rock it. But not because you tried to rock it, because you made an impact.
Thank you. Yeah. So Kimberly, for our listeners, and we'll have all this in the show notes as well, so people don't need to rush off and grab a pen or pencil or, type it up into their phone. Tell our listeners how to get involved with this masterclass, other than buying the book, which I highly recommend anyway. But
so everything, I used to have all these different websites, and we're consolidated into one beautiful place. And everything is on braveleadershipuniversity.com. And so that's where you can find all of our good stuff. And then I'm, of course, on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, my Kimberly Davis author page on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. So, you can find me all over the place. But probably the best place that's kind of an anchor for us is our Brave Leadership University website.
That sounds great. And if you could leave our listeners with just one thought into the future, what would that be?
One out of everything we've been talking about.
I know.
I think it's to bring intention to how you show up. So instead of being on autopilot, think about the impact you want to have on the person that you're about ready to talk to, and let that inform how you show up. Because if you don't think about that, our autopilot doesn't always serve us. We live in reaction to the world. So if you can simply ask yourself, what's the impact I want to have on this person before I talk to them, it will change everything for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's perfect. And for our listeners, all of this information will be in the show notes at elkinconsulting.com. Thank you, Kimberly.
Oh, I am so grateful. This has been just a joy, as I knew it would be.
Are you ready to start your story portfolio so you have the right story ready to share when the opportunity presents itself? When you're ready to get started, my book, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is available in all the regular places, and the audiobook version is available on Google Play and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. As a special bonus for listeners, the audiobook includes 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Also on my website is a free podcast interview checklist. It's available to download to make sure you make the most out of your next podcast interview. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate the podcast and leave a review, and let me know that you've done it so I can thank you properly. Thank you.